Point Pleasant had never been a normal town, not truly. It existed in those liminal spaces where reality grew thin, in the pause between heartbeats. In the static between radio stations, in the way shadows sometimes moved just a fraction too late to match their owners. The townsfolk knew this in their bones, though none would speak it aloud. They understood in that quiet, primal way all creatures recognize danger, that some places simply weren't meant to be examined too closely. But when the null spectrum appeared a jagged, weeping fissure in the fabric of existence that hovered just beyond the old Miller property, that unspoken understanding curdled into outright terror. At first, it manifested as little more than a distortion in the air, like heat shimmering off asphalt in July. Those who stared too long reported seeing impossible angles within it. Geometries that hurt the eyes to perceive, shapes that existed in more dimensions than the human mind could comprehend. Then came the sounds not from the rift itself, but from everything around it. Trees creaked with the weight of unseen burdens. The river ran backward at dusk. Telephone wires hummed with voices speaking in reverse. The changes came slowly at first, creeping in at the edges of perception like mold spreading behind wallpaper. Old Man Henderson's prize roses bloomed black petals that dissolved into smoke when touched. The diner's coffee machine began dispensing liquid that smelled like pennies and moved against gravity, crawling up the sides of mugs in viscous strands. Children's laughter echoed from empty playgrounds long after midnight, their voices overlapping in impossible choruses, the same child laughing simultaneously at different ages, some voices decades older than they should have been. Then time itself began to stutter. Sheriff Dawson experienced it first. He'd been making his nightly rounds when his Cruiser S radio suddenly blared, static except the static contained whispers. And the whispers were speaking his name in his dead wife's voice. When he looked at his watch, the hands were spinning wildly. When he checked the dashboard clock, it displayed dates from 1947 and 2032 simultaneously. By the time he reached the station, only 3 minutes had passed according to the wall clock. But his coffee had grown cold and moldy, his paperwork had yellowed with age, and his deputy sat frozen at his desk, literally frozen, his skin glistening with frost in the warm room, his eyes wide and unblinking for 7 hours straight, until he suddenly gasped back to life with no memory of the lapse. The town's animals reacted first. Dogs refused to go outside after dark, whining and scratching at doors until their paws bled. Crows gathered in silent congregations on power lines, their heads tilted at unnatural angles, watching something only they could see. Then the livestock began disappearing, not just vanishing, but leaving behind grotesque remains. A cow's skeleton turned inside out, its bones polished smooth. A pig's carcass fused with the barn wall, its flesh merging seamlessly with the wood grain. Chickens whose feathers had grown into tiny, perfect replicas of human hands. People started seeing doubles of themselves, not doppelgangers. Not exactly, these were their own reflections walking just out of sync with reality. Sarah Whitmore saw herself standing in her kitchen 3 seconds before she actually entered it. Tommy Greer watched his own back vanish around a corner he'd yet to reach. The doubles never interacted, never seemed to notice their originals, except for Mrs. Langford, who swore her reflection winked at her before stepping out of the mirror and walked right through her, leaving the old woman bedridden with a sudden case of advanced osteoporosis that aged her bones 20 years in an instant. The null spectrum grew hungrier. What began as a distortion expanded into a full-blown wound in reality, a jagged rip in the air that pulsed like an infected vein. It emitted no light, but rather devoured it. Staring into it wasn't like looking at darkness, but at the complete absence of existence itself. Those who approached too close reported feeling their thoughts unravel, their memories rearranging themselves into configurations that made no linear sense. Jim Parker went in to investigate and came back out 5 minutes later convinced he was his own grandfather, speaking fluent Polish, and bearing a pocket watch that hadn't been manufactured since 1913. His skin smelled like turned earth, and his shadow moved independently, lingering several seconds behind his actual movements. Then came the whispers from below. The town's plumbing began carrying more than water. Toilets gurgled with voices. Showers sprayed liquid that wasn't quite water, something thicker, with a coppery taste that made bathers forget their own names for hours afterward. Sink drains exhaled breath that fogged mirrors with symbols no one could read, but that filled viewers with inexplicable grief. Old Widow Marlowe claimed her bathtub filled with black liquid one night, and when she reached to pull the plug, something reached back, a skeletal hand with too many joints, its fingers ending in ink-black quills that left tattoos on her wrists that changed daily, spelling out messages in no known language. The church's confessionals became dangerous. Father O'Malley stopped offering absolution after 3 parishioners emerged speaking in tongues, unknown languages that linguists from the university confirmed should unexist. Their vocal cords had physically altered, developing extra folds that allowed sounds no human throat should produce. One woman, Mrs. Callahan, began singing a dirge that made glass vibrate. An insect swarm in perfect geometric patterns, her voice hitting notes that caused nosebleeds in anyone who listened too long. The town's dreams synchronized. People began experiencing the same nightmares. Empty cities built from bone and obsidian, where the sky pulsed like a living membrane. They dreamed of a figure standing at the center of these ruins. A towering silhouette composed of shifting angles that hurt to look upon, its form constantly rearranging itself like a kaleidoscope of shadows. It never spoke, never moved toward them, yet its presence filled them with the absolute certainty that it was aware of them, that it was studying them as a biologist might study microbes under a lens. Children's drawings took on disturbing consistency. Without prompting, every child under 12 began sketching the same bizarre structure, spiraling towers that bent in impossible ways, staircases that terminated in mid-air, bridges connecting nothing to nowhere. The truly unsettling part? The perspectives were mathematically perfect. These weren't the crude scribbles of children, but precise architectural renderings of spaces that couldn't exist in 3 dimensions. When asked where they'd seen such places, the children would only say the teacher showed them. No one could explain which teacher they meant. The elementary school had no staff member matching the description they gave. The tall man with no face who stands in the corner. The town's history rewrote itself. Records in the local library began changing. Photographs and yearbooks showed unfamiliar students. The monument to Civil War veterans suddenly bore names no one recognized, commemorating battles that never happened. The graveyard gained new headstones dating back centuries, their inscriptions in languages that hurt the eyes to read. Old families discovered branches in their family trees. They couldn't account for Graytons, who supposedly died in mysterious circumstances. Cousins who allegedly committed atrocities no one could recall. The water tower became an epicenter of strangeness. Shadow no longer matched its shape, stretching in wrong directions regardless of the sun's position. The metal groaned at night with sounds like gigantic machinery operating somewhere inside. Those who climbed it reported feeling the structure continue upward far beyond what should have been possible, the ladder stretching into darkness where cold winds blew and something large moved just out of sight. The town's water took on a metallic taste, and when left standing, formed fractal patterns in the glass that resembled the branching structure of neurons, or perhaps the expansion of some cosmic web. Then the disappearances started. Not the usual kind, these were erasures. People would vanish, and within hours, all memory of them would fade. Photographs they appeared in would show empty space where they'd stood. Documents bearing their names would become blank. Their homes would appear as they'd been before the person lived, their old wallpaper returning. Furniture reverting to previous owner styles. Only a few noticed these changes, their minds somehow resistant to whatever force was rewriting reality. These unfortunate souls found themselves burdened with knowledge they couldn't share, watching as their neighbors forgot spouses, parents forgot children. And the town's history simplified itself around these new absences. The architect made its presence known. It came first in dreams, then in the periphery of Vigia, towering figure composed of shifting darkness, its form constantly reconfiguring like a puzzle that refused to stay solved. It stood at the edge of the null spectrum, one elongated hand pressed against the fabric of reality as if testing its tension. Those who saw it directly suffered immediate consequences. One man aged 50 years in an instant, another found her skin covered in equations that burned when read aloud. A third discovered his reflection had stopped mimicking him, and now only smiled knowingly when he was unlooking. The final change came quietly. One morning, the townsfolk awoke to find the sky wrong. Not cloudy, not stormy wrong, in some fundamental way that defied description. The color wasn't quite blue anymore. The clouds moved in patterns that made eyes water to follow, and the sun. The sun had developed a dark spot at its center that looked unsettlingly like a pupil. Birds flew in perfect geometric formations. Rain fell upward on windless days. The very air tasted electric, buzzing with potential energy that made fillings ache and pacemakers skip beats. The null spectrum pulsed hungrily, widening with each passing hour, its edges fraying like old cloth as the architect worked patiently at the seams of existence. Soon, very soon, Point Pleasant would serve its true purpose not as a town, but as an opening. A door, a wound,